Today we'll knit the fronts of the spa robe. The two are knitted just alike, but we reverse the shaping, knitting one with an armhole on the left and a wrap extension on the right, and the other one with the wrap extension and armhole on the other side. We'll be knitting the nice overlap that makes this robe more a spa robe than a bathrobe and prevents us from displaying things we'd rather the neighbors not see. As we work, we'll hand manipulate a band that runs right on up and prevents us from having to add anything to stop rolling later on. The neckline shaping starts about waist high, but if you're good at math, you will realize that it seems to start higher, that I'm not allowing for average back waist length as the numbers read. That is because of fabric such as this one, in a volume such as this project represents, can be expected to drop significantly. If we knitted to our true waist length, it would actually hang below and tend to gape in the front. You will have knitted the back to 188 rows for average women, 198 for tall women and average men. And you will have bound off for the armhole after row 130 or 140. Make notes to this effect so that you can repeat these things. This time, we will make an armhole on one side only, and at row 116, for both lengths, we will begin shaping the neckline. Here's a look at the cover of the written pattern, and it actually includes 5 sizes. One is a king and queen size that finishes to 60 inches in circumference. I'm not able to include that in the video because it has some construction differences, but I just wanted you to know that it's available if you need it. This is a screenshot from the written pattern. For each part of the front, you will cast on, if knitting to size 42, 46, 50, or 54, 68, 71, 74, or 80 stitches. Cast on those stitches, knit 20 rows, and reform most of the hem as you did for the back piece. But now I'm up at the center front 9 stitches. We will treat them similarly, but a little bit differently. Do ladder all the way down to insert the tool into the first true stitch, and now latch back up as a purl, but as a tucked purl, slipping the tool behind one rung of the ladder, grabbing the second and pulling through, and working all the way up like that. Because we have only 19 rows, the final stitch will be a single. In other words, there's no rung to slide behind. And later we will correct that. We can ladder that stitch down and resume the tuck purling, but there's an easier way, and I'll be showing it to you shortly. Just as for the remainder of the hem that's regular purl stitches, we're using every third needle here, but instead of working ordinary purl stitches, we're working tucked purl stitches. That's the only difference. It creates part of the front band, and it will go all the way up, totally preventing rolling, and look very nice. The tucked purls take place only at the front edge. The side seam receives normal hemming, and we tuck purl on columns 3, 6, and 9, and then we stop and just go on to regular purling. Here comes column 9, and once that's done, the rest will be ordinary columns of purl stitches. When you've worked all the way across, working on every third column of stitches, there should remain 2 undisturbed knit stitches on what will be the side seam. When 20 rows have turned into knit 2, purl 1 ribbing, we're done with the hem, but these 9 edge stitches will continue on up the front. We'll keep working on them. That was the right front, and here it is farther along. For the left front, the tuck rib stitches will appear on the right-hand edge of the work rather than the left. Every so often, while knitting straight up the front, to the point at which we will begin shaping the neckline, ladder down to where you last left tuck purl stitches, undo the loop that was a single because we want a continuous line of tucked purls, and begin latching up again. Do this on columns 3, 6, and 9 from the front edge, and make sure you remember to tuck them. That means sliding behind one rung and grabbing the next rung all the way up. You may do this as often or as seldom as you like, but I find that for me, doing it about every 30 rows works out well. Always use columns 3, 6, and 9. Then hang the final stitch back on the original needle so you can keep on knitting. Now here's the trick that I mentioned that will allow you not to keep having to correct that one single stitch. Let's start with column 9, and now I'm working on the left front, so my reformed edge stitches are on the right edge. Just leave that single and begin latching up, but only for this one column. Now, I'm not going to do the other columns right now. I'm going to knit 10 more rows, and then I will treat column 6 in the same manner, leaving the single stitch as it is and latching up every other row thereafter. After another 10 rows, we'll do the same with column 3. So each one of these columns has a single stitch in it that really shouldn't be there, but it is extremely hard, close to impossible to spot it. And now every time that we stop, we'll be able to latch up a complete unit of tucked purl stitches. Making the adjustment in each column 10 rows apart makes it much less likely that the fact that we have done this will be spottable. Here I'm catching up column 9 and column 6. Then we'll ladder down column 3, make the adjustment, and from then on up the front we'll be able to just stop and latch without much of a fuss. I know this is hand manipulation and some people try to avoid it, but keep this in mind. This is a relatively bulky yarn and much, much easier to work with than fine yarn to do handwork like this. And it's really quite fast. Faster than knitting on a separate band, I would say. Plus, it looks fabulous on the finished garment. Now, when row 116 has been completed, it's time to begin shaping the front. And we do that by moving the 9 edge stitches that we've been working on all over one needle space. First move stitches 7, 8, 9, then 4, 5, 6, then 1, 2, 3. And the new needle 9 will contain 2 stitches. Now we come to a slight difference between the version of the pattern for average height women and for taller people, whether women or men. For the shorter version aimed at average women, we're going to knit 2 rows after each decrease, then make another decrease, and we'll do it until a total of 35 decreases have been completed. Here you're seeing me work on the right front again, and I have not reformed the stitches for the band in a while, but we will every few rows, in the same manner as we were doing all the way up the front, except there is one change. We won't reform stitch 9 anymore. It's receiving all the extra stitches. Column 3 and column 6, however, will continue getting turned into tuck rib all the way up the front. Now let's do the version for taller people. Here is the first transfer, decreasing after knitting row 116. Now knit 3 rows. Carriage will be on the opposite side from whence it started. We make the next decrease. So for taller people, we decrease every 3 rows rather than every 2 rows 10 times. Then we go on decreasing, but every 2 rows, just as for the shorter people. You would think this would make the front look substantially different, but it doesn't. Here's the piece you just watched me knit. The bottom part after the beginning of the shaping is done every 3 rows. The next part is done every 2 rows, and it's mighty hard to spot the difference. And this allows us to give taller people a longer waist length with very little other change. The number of decreases for both the average and tall version is the same, a total of 35, counting that very first one. And of course, for both versions, ladder down stitch number 3 and stitch number 6 every so often. As I mentioned, I like to do it every 30 rows and latch them back up as tucked purls. On the actual wearer's body, this design represents a 16 or an 18-inch waist length. Both of these are really common average waist lengths. However, if you're knitting for somebody very petite or very tall, you may need further changes. The written pattern includes a separate file to help you with that. And basically, these are the instructions. To alter the waist length by another inch either direction, either compress the frequency or extend the frequency of the decreases. To make the waist length an inch shorter than the shorter version is now, decrease every row 5 times, then finish out the decreases every other row. To lengthen the waist length longer than the present long version, make an additional 5 decreases at intervals of 3 rows rather than 2, and then finish out the total number of decreases every other row. While giving all this attention to the front edge, don't forget about the armhole. You will still need to bind off 8 stitches on the same row that you bound off for the back. That would be row 130 or 140. Here I'm binding off the right armhole, then hang the last loop back onto stitch number 9. Free those stitches. You don't have to use the bind off that I did. You may use the transfer bind off or even back stitch if you want. And now resume knitting. I've finished binding off now, so of course the fabric rolls inward, but there's the right underarm. The final decrease will fall on row 184 or 194, depending on whether you're knitting the average length or long version. Knit 2 more rows after that point and do the final latching up of the front edge. That's the continuation of columns 3 and 6. When these are complete, knit 2 plain rows and bind off. Remember to make the underarm on the opposite side of the second front, and of course the center front is also on the opposite side. Shortly we'll get back together and knit the sleeves.